Hello everyone, Marcus Stahl here, and today we're going to be doing an impressions video on Sword Art Online, episode 13 of season 2, Phantom Bullet. Let's get this started. For my overall impressions, I'd have to say that I actually really enjoyed this episode. It had some its highs and lows, but at the same time it was engaging all throughout, and for once I can proudly say that at the very least I started to feel as though I was watching the first season during this season, as is compared to the last majority of the episodes whereby it was interesting, but it never reached the heights I was hoping for. So definitely give this episode a watch if you haven't been keeping up with the others, since I do believe that this is probably one of the better ones, although do note, in this episode, a lot of the loose ends for this series have basically been covered up, and we're essentially left off on a cliffhanger in order to see what's going to happen in the next episode, which I think should sum up the rest of the Gun and Gale Online arc, and potentially set us up for another arc if the show continues. I'm not exactly too sure, since I'm not really sure exactly how long this season's going to be, but considering we're going to be hitting up on 14 episodes, I would expect them to at least start to cover the next season, which should go into things such as Mother's Rosario, and what was it called? You know what? I'll look it up later, but effectively there's 2 more arcs that I believe will possibly be covered in the coming weeks. So, let's watch with anticipation for what's going to be coming. We kick off this episode at the exact same spot that we ended it off last week, whereby we have Kirito being basically barraged by death guns, what apparently looks like a sword art. I'm not exactly sure how exactly he's pulling that off, or whether or not he's just really that fast, but effectively he's being hit by a very large barrage of blows by his opponent's S-Stock, so Kirito's definitely in quite the pickle. Although at the same time, that fight scene does look pretty awesome. Shinon is off in the distance, unfortunately, in a way we can say indisposed, due to the fact that her Hekata 2's scope has been damaged, and thus she can't really perform as a sniper at range as she would like to. Thus, she's left conflicted on how exactly she wants to support Kirito, and trying to motivate herself to get on over there to see if she can help out. After the introduction sequence, we now go over to IRL, where we see Asuna and the nurse observing Kirito's fight on the monitor on the Bullets tournament. Unfortunately, they can see that Kirito is definitely in quite the situation, and his bodily condition is actually not reacting very well, and he's suffering from some mild dehydration, which apparently, if Asuna is to be believed, the Atmosphere should disconnect Kirito in such a case. Although, simultaneously, it's kind of interesting, since it has been mentioned earlier that some players playing way too long in VR and ending up dying isn't too bizarre of a thing. I do believe in episode 1, because the players just eventually forget to do stuff like eat or don't even want to leave the virtual world. So I just find it interesting that with such safety features in place that someone can actually play in VR to what point that actually happens. Could it be a disableable feature? Or maybe they just hacked it out? I don't know. They don't really give us too many specifics on how exactly the operating system and other things work in VR in the Sword Art Online universe, so I suppose we're just going to have to make do with what we get. Now, what I'm not making do with is this very cheesy scene that happens immediately afterwards, whereby we see Asuna putting her phone, which is apparently supposed to be Yui's hand, quote-unquote, and her own hand over Kirito in order to support him. I kind of understand the emotional sentiment behind it, but I just can't help but think that that is extremely cheesy, and it really took me out of the experience. We return back to the battle, whereby we see Kirito is still in the belief set that he knows the name of Death Gun, and he continually tries to think back to see where he could possibly remember things, and he finally manages to realize that he actually does know Death Gun's name, which, while he rejected it during the encounter, prior to the encounter, during the strategy meeting, they had a list of all the red players, and one of the red players had red eyes, which correlated to the red eyes that Kirito was seeing on Death Gun. And accordingly, the name is Red-Eyed Zaza, or Akame no Zaza. Yep, that's right, everybody. He managed to pick it up anyway, even though they could have easily just gone with Klein and Asuna knowing it. Nope, let's just make Kirito an even bigger badass than he already is. For anybody wondering, Akame no Zaza does not actually correlate anything to Akame ga Kiru. I think it's just a coincidence. Akame means red eyes. Ga tends to mean is a form of a particle in Japanese, and Kiru is the word for kill, or at the very least an onomatopoeia of the English word kill. While in comparison, no Zaza No is an attribution factor, so it's kind of like an apostrophe S. So you can be saying that his name is Red Eyes Zaza. Although I'm not too sure what a Zaza is supposed to be. At the same time, just know that that connection, while Akame is kind of cool to hear in two situations and the syllables kind of match up, there's no correlation there. Although, at the same time, guys, I also thought Akame got Kiryu the moment I saw that. Deathkin is actually taken aback by the revelation and stumbles a bit during his approach on Kirito. This gives Kirito and Shinon an opportunity to finally take him out. Shinon had managed to close in from a while back, and had managed to get her targeting precursor onto Deathgun's shoulder, which forces him to take action and maneuver in order to avoid it. However, Kirito takes this opportunity and takes out his pistol and shoots him to prevent him from cloaking out, and then proceeds to avoid his blade and successfully use his own lightsaber to slice Deathgun in half. Did I mention that this episode had pretty good fight scenes? It has some pretty good fight scenes. In the midst of the whole situation, there are two little details I want to call out. First off, Kirito dubbed the opportunity created by Shinon the Phantom Bullet, so cute little title drop right there. But the second thing that I want to note is, guys, isn't this twice now that during the series' quote-unquote climax that Kirito has effectively had his eyes go yellow for some reason? I'm not really sure what that's actually supposed to be representing, but quite frankly, it just kind of creeps me out every single time it happens. I mean, all of a sudden, he has that cool scene whereby he has his pistol and his lightsaber, and they kind of correlate to the Elucidator and the Dark Repulsor from Sword Art Online. But then they have to go and just muddle it with his eyes glowing yellow in the midst of an attack. That almost looks more monster-like than heroic, if you ask me. So quite frankly, it kind of just takes me out of the experience, and it's just... overall, Yellow Eyes aside, the fight scenes have been pretty cool this episode, so definitely 2 thumbs up for me on the fighting so far in GGO. Although at the same time, I must admit, I kind of find it ironic that I found the best fight scenes were the ones involving swords in a game about guns. So, yeah, I suppose one could say that might just be my personal preference, since I do prefer sword fighting over gun battles. But at the same time, nah. We get a little brief moment to finally start cooling things down. We see Asuna and Yui are relieved over there in IRL. And then we return back and kind of drop a bit of the intro into here. Kirito and Shinon start to approach each other similarly to what happens in the intro, if not the exact same way. Although instead of jumping at each other and attacking, they just fist bump. So yeah, post-battle victory fist bump, I suppose. With the main conflict now over, Shinon and Kirito discuss more or less what they are planning on doing in order to rectify the situation IRL. They suggest that they should call the cops, probably, in order to make sure that Shinon is safe and that nothing has been done to her. And Shinon actually provides Kirito with her IRL name, Shino Asada, and tells him her address, although we don't get a hearing on that, thankfully. Anyhow, we continue onwards, and we get to see that Kirito is a little bit taken aback that he received the name, although he tries to make a snide remark on the fact that her username is effectively her name, but just with some of the syllables changed. Since in Japanese, I don't believe there's an actual hiragana or katakana for the sound si. It's usually pronounced shi. So, for example, in the word hanasu, if I was going to form it into an e or like something like tabemasu or let me pick a better word, asobimasu. The bu, it would normally be asobu, but it's asobi when you're trying to change it into I suppose you could say into a form of stem, so asobimasu. With a word like hanasu, there is no hanasi, so it would be hanashimasu. So effectively, Shinon went with a sinon, since it's kind of corollary from a way you would translate it from Japanese to English. I'm not too sure in the specifics, but at the same time, she did also add an N at the end. Although she also slightly remarks that Kirito's name is basically just Kiri from Kirigaya, and Kazuto's To at the end combined together. So yeah, neither of them are particularly creative with their chosen usernames. So once we finally get that little, I suppose, informative little bit right there out, we also finally have to figure out how they want to end the tournament. Shino actually remarks that the first GGO tournament ended up with 2 winners. The situation being primarily that one of the players effectively took their victory a bit too early, so their opponent dropped a grenade and effectively killed them both, martyrdom style. So, yeah, Kirito is wondering, okay, what is this relevant for? At which point, she gives him a grenade right into the hand. It's already beeping. He starts fumbling with it. At which point, to make sure that he doesn't get out, she glomps him in the most adorable way. I just have to say, that was just so kawaii. It was just, oh my gosh. It was adorable. At which point, they both blow up in a beautiful explosion. Yep, +1 for cuteness points. Actually, you have to wonder, did the audience over in ALO also want to give it a thumbs up, or are they just wondering, hey, do we have another person to have to deal with, Mr. Harameister Kirito Gary Stew? With the tournament over and Kirito looking over the statistics, it does seem that Death Gun might have been responsible for the death of 2 players, Player Lighter and some other player, which clearly implies to him that there may be more than one accomplice in this whole situation with Death Gun, which worries him since he needs to wonder about Shinon now. Meanwhile, Shinon is finally waking up out of the Amusphere experience, at which point she explores her apartment to try to see if there's anybody hidden there, if there's any evidence of some tampering or anything like that. And she gets suddenly startled towards the end when somebody rings on her doorbell, but it turns out it's her schoolmate and/or friend, Shinkawa Kyoji. Kyoji-san is implying that he wants to congratulate Shinon for a job well done, and he brings some food over. But when he finally gets inside and they start discussing her victory, how he's happy that she's the strongest, all of a sudden things start taking a turn for the worst when he brings up the fact that, hey, you promised that when things were over, that you would wait, or that I just needed to wait. Is now it? Yeah, that starts getting pretty creepy, at which point he starts approaching Shinon in a very yandere, very uncomforting fashion. And the entire scene is just completely just disconcerting and uncomfortable. I mean, guys, I have to express, this just creeped me out down to the spine. Ugh. So he just starts consistently just saying things like, I like you, I love you, or stuff like that, and he's just saying crazy insanity, just ridiculous. During which he actually lets slip the fact that he is correlated to Death Gun, when he takes out a syringe and implies that he's going to poison Shinon with effectively a muscle relaxant. And in case you guys didn't know, a muscle relaxant does technically include your heart, since your heart is a muscle. So implicitly, that's probably the most likely method by which everyone was dying in the mystery. Basically, they get injected with a muscle relaxant when the accomplice successfully enters and infiltrates their room, and they die due to a heart failure or a heart attack. I guess a mixture of both in some cases, due to the fact that their heart has effectively been forced to stop. We also get the little detail in that Death Gun is technically multiple people in certain respects. Kyoji-san himself was playing Death Gun during the whole situation with Zekushido, but the thing is, he personally wanted to be the one to take out Shinon, since he didn't want even his own brother to be the one to do that act, since he didn't want anybody touching Shinon aside from himself, and most certainly not Kirito. So that's probably a bit of the connection we can kind of see there. Don't try to understand crazy, guys. I don't even want to try to think into the psychology behind that. It's very clear that the author himself already knows it, that we shouldn't be thinking into the psychology behind it. So, effectively, Kyoji tries to force himself onto Shinon by killing her. Yeah, I'm not too sure what he's thinking there. But effectively, it's one of the creepiest things I've seen in a while in anime, considering he's just all up on top of her, dominating the poor girl. And she just breaks. I mean, she effectively just recedes into her mind and is just... there's just nothing here. Just hides out into her own mental psyche. At which point she does successfully get pulled out by the VR Shinon, which quite frankly, I'm not sure why that exists. I suppose we do take on alter egos in games, but meh. I'm just rolling with it. Effectively, VR Shinon manages to get her upper mood a little bit and finally get her the will in order to resist Kyoji's advance and try to make a break for the door. Unfortunately, with all the locks that she has, Kyoji successfully manages to catch up onto her and starts basically dragging her back, going up and feeling up her entire legs throughout the process. It's extremely uncomfortable, guys. I repeat, I just did not like this scene at all. During the process, though, we also do get another little note whereby he does mention that the reason that Death Gun had the very gun that Shinon was afraid of was due to the fact he thought it would be fitting, considering that that was Shinon's gun that she used in order to deliver justice out in the real world. So we can kind of see a bit more psyche, but again, I'm not going to try to analyze it too much since crazy is crazy, and it's just another excuse for the reasoning behind Death Gun's certain actions and other details like that. Finally, though, when things are just at their direst, Kirito manages to spring open the door and knocks Kyoji off of Shinon, instructing her to run away, which Shinon is probably a little bit worried about due to the fact that she was hoping he wouldn't come due to the fact that he himself would be hurt, although at the time she was kind of surrendered mentally that she was going to die at the situation. But effectively, Kirito's pulling a White Knight moment and trying to save the day, at which point we get left with a sort of cliffhanger, because we have to remember, guys, Kyoji is technically armed with the syringe, so Kirito could technically be poisoned himself in this situation. So we have to see next week's episode whether or not he will be. Well then, everyone, that just about does it for my impressions of this week's episode. Do remember to hit that like button down below if you liked the video, and I do have to apologize if there's a bit of a problem with some of the lighting or some other stuff. Well everyone, that just about does it for this week's episode. This has been Marcus Dahl, logging out.